recording. Okay. All right. Just wait a couple more minutes. All right. All right. So it's 12:05. So I think I'll get started. So I'm Jessica. I'm an intuitive eating dietitian and work with disordered eating and disordered eating patients. So excited to present this little chat with you and workshop with you today on finding food peace and how to end the endless cycle of trying to diet and manipulate the way that we try to eat and our bodies with the hopes of finding peace and freedom. I have been practicing intuitive eating for many years now, and it definitely was something that changed my life and also the way that I work with my patients. I find that it brings people so much more joy and peace rather than handing them a meal plan and then telling them what they can eat and not eat, which just puts you on that endless cycle of dieting. So I'm probably going to ask questions today. If you want to participate, you can. If you don't, just kind of think about the answers in your mind, maybe jot them down or come back and listen again and think about the questions that I've asked. It is a different way of thinking coming from diet culture to an intuitive eating perspective. It is almost like black and white. I mean, diet culture is very much eat this, not that, and putting a lot of morality around food, whereas intuitive eating looks at food as a whole and makes it very neutral. And sometimes that makes people uncomfortable because we have been taught over the years that food should be controlled and we should really pay attention to what we're eating because it's scary or bad things will happen if we eat foods that we actually want to eat. So intuitive eating can feel a little bit uncomfortable to people. So just kind of let it soak in, take it in, process it, think about it, and just kind of notice how it lands in your body. It might feel really good and something that you want to explore, and maybe it's something that you're not quite ready to, and that's okay too. It definitely is a different way of thinking about food. All right, so I put together a little bit of a presentation. It won't take too long, really just to keep me on track so I don't start talking about so many different things because there's so many things to talk about. And let's see, so if I can figure out how to change the slides, there we go. So I told you already who I am. A little bit of my history around food and intuitive eating. You know, I did come from an upbringing where my mom was very focused on how we looked, what she looked like, what we were eating all the time, and putting a lot of labels on our foods, good and bad. That's how I grew up thinking that food should be. And when I thought about eating healthy, it really was fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, and healthy fats, which is what we hear in our everyday world, you know, according to like My Plate and all that. That's what healthy eating is. What I didn't realize is that healthy eating also incorporates foods that you like, and how fearing foods actually inhibits our ability to choose how to nourish our body, because we should have fun foods along with the nutritious foods in order to have a good relationship with food in our body. So healthy eating and really challenging that healthy eating needs to look a certain way, which is how I grew up, and morphing that into healthy eating includes fruit, vegetable, lean proteins, and healthy fats, and also those foods that we like and enjoy that may not have that nutrition or that nutritious component to it, right? Food should be enjoyed, it should be enjoyable, and it should add to our life and not take away. Whereas sometimes if we're striving to be so healthy, we're taking out food groups or favorite foods or fearing foods would actually and creating more stress than there needs to be. I'm also a former CrossFit competitor, which was really an amazing time, but also contributed even more to my disordered eating patterns around food and also disordered eating relationships with exercise. So again, like both that healthy eating and healthy exercise behaviors, there is that fine line that they can cross over into unhealthy behaviors, but they still look from the outside like you're doing something good for yourself. So that's where diet culture kind of comes in. It says, this is healthy eating, this is healthy exercise, but it doesn't teach us that it can cross the line and go into a place that's actually hurting our lives and interfering with our lives. And it's really hard for us to see that because of the world we live in. So hopefully during this presentation and this little workshop, you'll be able to notice maybe there are things that you want to start to question around your relationship with food and your relationship with exercise that aren't adding to your life or interfering with the way you live your life, that could be thought about differently or changed in order to be better supportive of the life you want to live. I'm on a mission to kind of break that generational curse that I was brought up with, and I'm sure my mom was brought up with, around food and how we think about food in our bodies. I have 3 daughters, so it's incredibly important to me to have them have a healthy relationship with food, exercise, and their body. And if I kept practicing what I was taught, I would have just passed that down to my kids too. And then they would have continued the generational diet curse, right? Teaching their kids and their kids and their kids. So there always is this time where you can choose, if you recognize it, to be kind of the cycle breaker. It's not easy to be the cycle breaker, but you can definitely take the steps to move in a different direction than what you were previously taught. And we can do that in lots of areas of our life. And more specifically to what I do that with people in terms of, breaking the generational narrative around food, how we should look in our body and what's acceptable, and how we actually want to perceive movement and exercise. So hopefully I can teach you some of those things today. My ultimate goal is to teach you that there's another way to eat healthy, quote unquote, that doesn't involve a meal plan, doesn't involve a diet, doesn't involve cutting out your favorite foods, or my favorite, cutting out entire food groups. So we don't have to do any of those things in order to be healthy. All right. So brief overview. I want to talk about the dark side of diets. I think a lot of people who have done diets or had, I hesitate to say diets because I didn't identify as a dieter, but I definitely had food rules. So whether you did a diet or you had food rules, I would just want to expose the dark side of that, and then give you a little overview of what diets don't work. I get a lot of pushback on that. So just giving you some more information to kind of put in your arsenal to kind of challenge that old narrative that you might have around food and dieting. And then the key to intuitive eating is really listening, learning how to listen to your body, which, we're not really taught to do, or if you are more of an intuitive person, the world makes you think you got to shove that down and not listen to it, and that what your body is telling you is wrong, what you're feeling is wrong. So really the gist of intuitive eating is bringing that trust and awareness back to you and in your body, so you can make decisions, how you want to nourish yourself, how you want to move, how you want to feel, how you want to dress, how you want to live your life is based on how you feel and what you feel is right for you, rather than on what diet culture or your parents or your grandma or Aunt Sally says is right for you. So really bringing you back to yourself. And then just giving you kind of like a couple steps to start to move away from, breaking up with those food rules or diets that you might have, and starting to challenge the narrative that you may have around food, body, and get you moving in the right direction. Okay. So it moves. The dark side of diets. So, well, I'm sure you guys know, like the diet industry it's projected to be a 278 billion with a B dollar industry. And this always blows my mind because, if diets actually worked, right, it wouldn't be a $1 billion business. If they actually did what they said they were going to do, it would be an industry that was zero, right? But it's not an industry of zero. The diet industry really harps on this is the way to be healthy. And it also makes you feel like if you're not on a diet or if you're not following one of these plans, you're doing something wrong. And then you're not doing everything you can do to be healthy if you're not following one of these diet plans. So we really want to see the harm that diets are doing to people or yourself. So if you reflect back on, I don't know, maybe your week or your day, and just see where any of your food rules or diets have kind of popped in and made you feel like you couldn't do something, or perhaps took away from your experience of whatever you were doing, like if you were on a vacation or if you were out with friends after work. Where did some of these diet rules come in and disrupt how you were feeling and interfere with your experience of the day? So really that's what dieting does. It interferes with your ability to enjoy your life. It worships thinness, it worships strictness, it worships all these things that aren't actually health producing. Best case scenario, if you do a diet, you might lose weight, right? That's everybody's like main reason for going on a diet is to lose weight. What you don't, and I wrote on the slide, short-term weight loss, right? Because if you look at every single study, weight loss that's achieved through a diet is temporary. There's no study that goes past that 3-year mark that shows success. So you can lose weight. There's like 5% of people might be able to keep the weight off forever. That's 5%. Everybody else loses the weight in a short period, loses the weight and keeps it off for a short period of time. So it's not really a best case scenario, but that's the best case scenario that I could think of. Worst case scenario when it comes to dieting, you fear food. You're totally obsessed with the scale or what you ate in the day, or what or comparison, like what you eat versus what somebody else's eat. It's also diets kind of make you hyper focus on the food. They make you strive to get back to where I used to be. I used to weigh this. If I do X, Y, and Z, I'll get back to my old weight. So it keeps you living. I tend to say it sometimes with my patients, like you're looking in the rear view mirror, but you're headed straight ahead. So if we're continuously looking back to where you used to be or what you used to look like or how you used to eat, you're missing everything that's right in front of you. You're so busy looking behind you at what you used to do and what you used to look like. You're missing everything that's kind of unfolding in front of you. So you're missing out on a lot of life because you're so worried about maybe what you ate or what you shouldn't be eating, and that the shame spiral that sometimes diets send you down. So, the other thing I think that's important to say when it comes to the dark side of diets is, why do we keep doing this over and over and over again? Why do we keep trying the next fad diet or restricting a food group? And why do we think that if we keep trying something different, we're going to get the result we're looking for, when evidence says, like not just like research, but evidence from your body says that none of these things work? So we are like exposing ourselves over and over and over again to these different diets and restrictions, and nothing is working. And it just kind of keeps leading you down that spiral. And if diets did work, right, we wouldn't have that $1 billion business and everybody would be happy in their body and we wouldn't even need diets, right? So, or the next fad diet. So just kind of even pulling yourself back and looking at the big picture and asking yourself, why do I keep doing these things if nothing has worked? And if this industry is billions of dollars, like maybe I need to think about this logically. And is this something that I should be doing when evidence says nothing works? Maybe it is time to try something new. So just things to think about. I also want to say, like, The Biggest Loser was one of the highlight studies, if anybody wants to read anything about that, how those contestants lost a significant amount of weight, and when they went home, they gained it all back. But what the research shows when they did studies on these players is that when those players gained the weight back, they never gained their muscle back. So once they lost their muscle because they lost weight so quickly, the body burned the muscle. They never gained the muscle back, right? They gained the body fat back, but they never gained the muscle back, which means it put those players in even more dangerous and vulnerable positions. So the harm that was created by that show for these poor people that were thinking that they were going to get healthier, right, were only ended up unhealthier because they lost that metabolic muscle that actually kept their metabolism higher. So such an interesting study to read if anybody's interested in doing that. Okay, so the next, so cute. Okay. So a couple of things that I want you to think about, and this is where I get some pushback sometimes because people are like, oh, I need to diet because I need to, you know, improve my heart health, or smaller bodies are healthier, or I'm worried about my cholesterol, diabetes, cancer, all those things. So I have to go on a diet, Jess. Like, not dieting and doing this intuitive eating thing is just going to make me unhealthier. So I want you to think about that too, because remember, all these thoughts that we have around food and body, and even like I'll get diabetes if I'm if I'm not in a certain size body. All those are learned, right? They're all learned, whether they're learned from our family members or reading a magazine or whatever. They're all learned, but are they necessarily true? And so if we can notice some of these thoughts that are popping up and take a little break to kind of see, like, wait a minute, where did that thought come from? And is that actually true? And you may not have an answer right away, but we can start to work through I guess, the process of it and see, like, oh, actually, I learned that from Aunt Sally. Or in the example I'm going to give you, you can just see it with your own two eyes. So let's take, I need to be on a diet because, I don't want to get diabetes. By saying that, we're saying that only people in a certain size body are going to get diabetes, right? Only people who eat a certain way are going to get diabetes. We know that that's not true, right? If you look around at your friends or family, you might be able to see with your own two eyes that, okay, actually, this person over here eats fruits, vegetables, and exercises. They still got diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or they still got cancer, or they still have high cholesterol. And so it's not reserved for one body type. It's not reserved for one eating pattern. Yes, there's a correlation between the way we eat and disease, but it's not causation. So we need to be able to pull ourselves back and see, like, oh, okay, actually, I don't have to eat this way. I don't have to exercise this way to avoid these things. Those things could happen either way. There are things we can do to prevent them. It's not like throw it all out the window and eat whatever you want. But it's seeing that there isn't one way to do it. And those narrative and those messages that you have to eat this way to avoid these diseases or disease states isn't actually true. And we can see that with our own two eyes, because I'm sure we all know people who are in smaller bodies or thin bodies who still have those diseases. And we can see people who are in larger bodies who don't have those diseases. So those disease states are not reserved for a body type. So just one piece of evidence that there is a different way to go about being healthy, and it doesn't have to look one particular way. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of why diets don't work, and even if we do all the things right, we may not see the results that we're looking for or get the desired weight that we want. I want you to think about your genetic blueprint. This was kind of like a mind blower for me when I learned about this, because it's something that I never heard about it. My mom definitely didn't talk about our genetic blueprints. So when I read about this, it was like this light bulb moment of like, oh my gosh, of course, this makes so much sense. Like, we are born with, a certain eye color. I was born to have blue eyes. I was born to have a certain color hair. My foot size, my hand size, everything, way my teeth look, all those things were predetermined before I got here. So why wouldn't our body size and our bodies and the way our bodies are supposed to look, and why wouldn't that also be predetermined before we got here? It totally was, right? There was this blueprint that was made just for us before we even got here. And it was delivered to us when we arrived. And diet culture makes us think that we can change that blueprint. we can't change that blueprint. Of course, we can like nourish our body in a way that feels good and supportive, but our blueprint is our blueprint. I can't change my eyes from blue to brown just by like changing what I eat. I can't change my body size either away from its genetic blueprint. I'm always going to have muscular legs and a muscular butt. That's just going to be the way it is. I can fight it or I can accept it. And I think when we understand what our genetic blueprint is and that there's actually a blueprint to us, it might give us a little bit more peace and have us struggle less with trying to change our body and trying to find acceptance in what our genetic blueprint may be. With that, I also want to say you may not always like your genetic blueprint, right? So just because it's our blueprint doesn't mean we have to love it, right? Just because our house, like my house, had a blueprint before it was built. I don't love the blueprint of it, but it is what it is, and I have to figure out how to work with what I have, right? Like I want this house. So same with our bodies. We may not always love what our body genetic blueprint looks like, but finding acceptance with it helps you move through it with a little bit more, move through your day or life with a little bit more grace. So super important to think about. The other thing I want to talk about with diets, why diets don't work, is deprivation, right? When we are on a diet, we're not eating maybe the foods we like. Perhaps we're not eating enough foods. We have a lot of rules around the foods that we're eating. So when we are depriving ourselves, we're going to become obsessed with whatever we're depriving ourselves of, right? If you don't eat bread and then you go to this amazing, yummy Italian restaurant and they serve you delicious bread, guess what? You're eating the whole basket of bread, no doubt. If it goes the other way too, right? If you're on vacation eating fast food all day long, French fries, chicken nuggets, ice cream, all the things, and then you come home, my guess is that you would probably crave some fruits and vegetables, right? So you're going to want, your body is going to crave what it didn't have or what it feels like it's not going to be allowed to have. So when we take the deprivation piece out, right, and allow freedom around food, which is another important principle of intuitive eating, we don't have that hyper focus or that obsession with the food, right? Like if you think, I mean, the best example I can give is if you don't see somebody for a long period of time, or you start from the front, if you know this person, so say you're like, your kid is going off to college, you're going to want to spend time with your kid every single second of the day, going out to dinner, maybe getting coffee, spending your weekends together, like soaking them all in, right? Because you know they're going to go away. And then they go away, right? And then they come back at Christmas time. Most likely you're going to be like, let's go shopping, let's go here, let's go there, because you've been deprived of them, right? You're going to want to spend time with them. It's not any different when we talk about food. If you're depriving yourself of food, when you have the exposure to it, you're going to eat more of it, right? Or if you think, you know, I'm going on a diet tomorrow, most likely that's going to make you want to eat more of it before it's gone. So when we take that deprivation piece away and insert food freedom, more flexibility around food, there isn't so much focus on the food. It's kind of like this mind blower, right? Like, oh my gosh, if I don't control my food, I'm going to eat everything and I'm going to eat too much and I'm going to gain all this weight and life will be horrible. But it's the opposite. And I've seen it happen so many times with so many of my patients that when we start to loosen the reins around food and the food rules that they have, they realize that they don't actually want maybe all the foods that they're eating, or they prefer different foods, or the food doesn't have so much draw or pull to them anymore because it doesn't, you know, it's not saved for a special time, or it's limited or off limits. It's kind of this really like mind blower, I guess. I had this patient once that like was so scared to eat M&Ms. It was, and the goal for that person was to go buy like a little, you know, small size bag of M&Ms, keep them in the car or wherever, and have them whenever they wanted them. And so that was really scary. But what this patient ended up noticing was that by having the bag of M&Ms in the car and having that permission to have them whenever they wanted them, they didn't want them anymore. So maybe like the first day they ate half of the bag, this, you know, the second day they hopped in the car and They're like, yeah, I can have them later. I can have them tomorrow. I can have them, whenever they're there. I don't really want them right now. So it's that kind of crazy thing that when you give yourself permission, it takes away kind of that hyper focus. So really kind of cool how that happens. Um, the other example too is like, right, you want like a new car. All you see is the new car everywhere, all over the place. And then you get the car and then you don't notice it on the road anymore, right? It's like, we want what we can't have. So, and then once we have it, we don't think about it anymore. So give yourself that permission to bring those foods in a way that feels comfortable for you. It might be one food at a time. And notice how that actually isn't so scary. The last number three I want to talk about is how dieting interferes with your internal cues, right? Kind of deprivation plays into this too, but dieting makes you think you can't listen to, when you're hungry. And it doesn't trust that level of fullness. What is fullness? It doesn't let you pick foods that sound good to you. You might choose, the chicken with or the salad with chicken on top over the, like, I don't know, the lasagna that sounds delicious, right? And then you're left feeling unsatisfied. And then you go home and you have ice cream because you were unsatisfied from the salad. And so it really teaches you, or I should say, it strips away your ability to listen to your internal cues. Dieting doesn't teach you anything, right? It teaches you how to ignore yourself, if anything. But those introspective cues are kind of like trusting that when your body is hungry, right, and you get that little rumble in your belly, that is not a bad thing. That's actually your body kind of tapping, like saying, hello, I'm hungry, I need a little bit of food. And being able to trust that. I know so many people that are scared when they feel that hunger, like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be hungry. I just ate 3 hours ago. Well, your body needs food. It's kind of like, um, if we take that in terms of, like, I don't know, your children, like, they come up and they pull on your shirt sleeve and they're like, Mommy, I want a hug. And you give them a hug, right? And then 10 minutes later, they come up and they're like, Mommy, I want another hug. You would never say, like, I gave you one 10 minutes ago. You should be good. No, we'd be like, okay, I hear you. You need me again. Here's another hug. And when we can kind of see how our body's sending out these cues, those are like little taps. It's asking for some attention. It needs you. And your job is to respond and listen. And that's not what diet culture teaches us, but that is what intuitive eating will teach you. It's like, how do we trust that those cues that our body's giving us mean something? They're there for a reason. So whether it's a hunger cue, or if it's a craving, or if it's an emotional response to eating, whatever the thing is, it's there for a reason. And our job is to listen to it and build that internal trust. Dieting strips all that away. So we put all of our decision making into somebody else's hands, right? We're putting it into the keto diet plan's hands. We're putting it into Weight Watchers' hands. We're putting it into, the gym's latest food challenge hands. Like, why are we giving away our power to these external things that know nothing about you? The only person who knows what you need is you, right? And your body. So if we can start to bring some of that power back into you and yourself, and you feel more comfortable making those decisions for yourself, you are the most powerful person. You are making decisions for yourself based on you. So it really is, intuitive eating really does. This is a tangent. This is why I make slides. But intuitive eating does lead to intuitive living, because you are building that internal trust. And like, if you can do the foundational thing, like nourish yourself and trust that how you're nourishing yourself is correct, that starts to filter out into other areas of your life. And you start to notice, like, when I'm around this person, my body doesn't feel so good. Okay, I can trust that because I can trust what my body's telling me is true. When I go to work, and I'm over here in this group of people, I get this weird vibe. Something's up with that. Let me figure that out. We start to build that internal trust. So this is so much more than just eating and nourishing ourselves. It really is the foundation for being more in tune with what your body's telling you in other areas of your life too. So really kind of incredible. Diets keep us shaming ourselves. Like, when in the world has shaming yourself ever been helpful? Probably never, right? Like, we always, if you feel bad about eating an ice cream or something like that, like, oh, I should have done better. when has that actually changed for the long term, how you nourish yourself? Probably never. Maybe like for 5 or 10 minutes or a couple days, like you were, okay, I'm on the wagon. And that was a short-term win, because shaming yourself doesn't actually move the needle forward, right? Shaming, I call it the shame spiral. It just kind of keeps you swirling around and feeling bad about yourself. So we really want to make sure that we're moving you out of the shame spiral, because otherwise you'll just stay on that hamster wheel of just feeling bad, and then, you know, white knuckling it for a couple days, and then feeling bad and white knuckling it for a couple days. So really want to move you out of the shame spiral and get you feeling a lot better about how you're nourishing yourself. So those are just a couple reasons why diets don't work. And hopefully some things that you can tuck in the back of your brain and just think about, like, do they make sense to you? And again, some of these things may not make sense to you today. It may feel like really scary to believe that these things are true. So it's okay. It's totally okay. You have to be ready for it. But if anything, it's tucked in the back of your cap, and something that will pop up and you can think about as, as you go through your day. All right. So if you want to do this little exercise, you can take out a piece of paper. This is, I call it the handwriting activity. Hopefully this will bring some sort of awareness of how changing the way you feel about food, changing the way you nourish yourself, is not like a light switch, right? It's not like, oh, I don't want to diet anymore, I'm going to do intuitive eating, it'll be easy peasy. So what I want you to do is, if you can, and I'll just give you, a few seconds to do this, but I just want you to write your name with your right hand, right? Like Jessica Dean with your right hand. And then when you're done with that, I want you to write your name with your left hand. Just, don't think about it too much, just do it. And now compare the two, right? Like writing your name with your right hand was probably pretty easy and simple and automatic, right? Which is very much how you nourish yourself today. Very simple, easy, automatic, just as do what you do or believe what you believe, and it's totally fine. And then when you look at your, I should say your non-dominant hand, for me, it would be my left hand, it might be a more messy signature, right? Might look silly or look like a fifth grader wrote it or a first grader, whatever. I bet when you look at that left hand or that non-dominant hand signature, there's not a lot of judgment around it. I would guess that there's more curiosity, perhaps, maybe kind of like, look at that. Can't write my name with my left hand. I would doubt that there's a lot of judgment. And so when we move from one way of thinking around food to another way of thinking around food, thinking about food, or dieting to intuitive eating, kind of like moving from writing with your dominant hand to writing with your non-dominant hand, right? And meeting that change with lots of compassion, curiosity, and no judgment, because you're doing something different, you're thinking a different way, and kind of allowing that to unfold in the way that it's meant to, which might be slow, right? Or up and down, or confusing, or messy. So switching the way you think from dieting to intuitive eating isn't as simple as, I'm maybe for some people could be just like, screw this, I'm not doing this dieting thing anymore. But it's going to take a little bit of time to unlearn that natural pattern that you had and relearn something that's different, right? Letting go of writing with your dominant hand and relearning how to write with your non-dominant hand. It takes time. And building on those things that we talked about in the last slide, like believing that we have a genetic blueprint, believing that we can trust our body, believing that if we allow all foods into our life, that it's going to be totally okay. We want to build that internal trust or that introspective awareness, because that's where the information is going to come from. It's going to come from inside you, not from the outside, right? It's like you are going to do that work to kind of figure out what that looks like for you. One of the first things that I think is really helpful, and I think the next slide might go into this more, is when we talk about introspective awareness, is the first step, right, is listening and trusting to those hunger cues. And I think I had mentioned that before. It's like sometimes those hunger cues make us nervous. We're like, why are they here? I just ate. Or hunger cues are like, oh my gosh, I'll just wait another hour. We really want to build that trust, that information coming from your body, that when you feel a hunger cue, you got to listen to it. We also want to understand that we want choosing foods that sound good, right? Rather than saying like, I don't eat carbs. If carbs are sounding good, that is going to increase that level of satisfaction at the meal. If we're satisfied at a meal, then we're probably going to eat less. Not that that's the goal, but if we're not eating foods that are satisfying, we're going to tend to keep looking, right, through the cabinets or through the fridge, or that hunger is going to build, and then we're going to eat way too much at dinner time and be uncomfortable. So listening to that information your body's giving you around, when am I hungry? What sounds good? What do I want to eat? Gives you that ability to pay attention to that fullness factor too, which is, that right-hand side, I guess, right on the spectrum. And so let's see, this is the hunger fullness scale. I can send this out to you guys too. So if there is one place that I would suggest for you to start in bringing back those internal cues and helping kind of turn into your body rather than trusting diets and food rules, is just curious about like, what is this hunger fullness scale about? And how can I start to implement this in my life or my day today? So I explain the hunger fullness scale like Goldilocks. So Goldilocks went into the three bears house. She tried all the different porridges. One was too hot, one was too cold, and one was just right. And so when we think about the hunger fullness scale, we're probably going to like flip flop or go from one side, kind of like teeter totter, because we're learning. We might go, oh, too hungry, right? And then we eat, and then we might eat too much and get too full. But the goal is to be just right? The goal is to stay in that like 4, 5, 6 all day long. So we're never getting too hungry and never getting too full. We're just kind of staying right in that middle, like Goldilocks, and finding that place where our body feels the most safe. And so if you take away from today the hunger fullness scale, and I have patients that will like put a little photocopy of it on their phone or on their desk, and really try to pay attention to like, okay, you know what? I notice most of my days, I'm waiting until I'm like growly belly, and that may be too hungry for me. So let me try to eat when I start thinking about food. And that may be 4, right? Rather than a 1. And then you might notice that when I eat, when I feel like I'm a 4, just starting to think about food, I tend to eat slower, or I tend to make different choices, or I tend not to eat as much, or I tend to be more mindful, right? So we really want to just hone in on how does our body respond when we start to listen to that foundational piece of information of like, when are you hungry? And then we can't pay attention to fullness unless we're paying attention to our hunger, right? You can't, this would be where diets are like, you'll get this much food, right? This is your portion, which may or may not be the right amount for you. But if you're not paying attention to your hunger and nourishing yourself in a way that feels good and feels satisfied, there's no chance that you're going to be able to pay attention to your fullness. Because if you're not eating enough at lunch, chances are you're going to eat too much at dinner. If you're only limiting yourself to this amount of food, but you need this amount of food to feel satisfied, you can't pay attention to your fullness, right? So we need to make sure that we're honoring our fullness before we can honor honor our hunger before we can honor our fullness. So kind of take away this little Goldilocks idea. We want to find where we're just right on this scale. And again, it's almost like you just kind of sway back and forth between that middle range, like 4, 5, 6. You eat, for me, to give you an example, I know I need to eat when I start thinking about food. So that's before I feel a sensation in my belly. That's when I know I can go up into the kitchen, find food, have time to make the food, have time to sit down and enjoy the food. If I wait too long and I start having that growly belly, I start seeing spots. I can't quite think straight. I go into the kitchen and I'm like, I don't know what to eat, right? Or I just like do cereal, and then I'll do toast, and then I'll do, chicken parm and then I'll do some ice cream. I have less control when I don't pay attention to my hunger, when it's just a thought. If I wait too long, it becomes something totally, it's like a whole different animal. So kind of notice that. If there's one takeaway for today, is just notice, like, are you listening to that hunger cue? Are you ignoring it? Are you waiting too long? Is there anything that you can do different so you can build that introspective awareness, right? That information. So, what do we do about this? Where do we even start? I would say, play a little game. If you have kids, you might remember the I Spy game. I would say, like, play I Spy. Like, when you go into the grocery store or you're reading a magazine or talking with a friend, see if you can point out where diet culture is. Play the game I Spy. I spy diet culture there. I spy a lie around food and body there. It won't be too hard to do if you go to the grocery store, because every single magazine cover will say something like lose 10 pounds in one day. So play the game of I Spy and really start to question, does it make sense? Does this make sense? Does this even make sense? The second thing I want you to do is listen to your body, like using that hunger fullness scale. How do we build the trust in your body? Can you start to listen to those hunger cues and eat? Can you start to eat before you're too hungry? Can you start to eat when you are in that Goldilocks phase? And how does that impact the rest of your day? And I think that's a really important takeaway. It's like, when you do this, what is the response? And I think that might be pretty interesting. The other thing I want to say about that is sometimes you're more hungry in the day. It's like, I eat a lot the first part of my day and I'm not as hungry at the second part of my day. That's okay. I'm listening to my body. So if you start to adjust your eating patterns, you might notice something like that. And again, approaching this stuff with curiosity and compassion, like writing with your dominant hand to writing with your non-dominant hand. No judgment, just curiosity. The third thing to think about is challenging the rules. I had said this in the beginning. I grew up with a lot of rules around food from my mom, and I believed them because why wouldn't I? Until I got older and I realized I could think differently, right? And this is also true with many different things in our world. Once you know you can think about something differently, you have that option to change how you think about it, right? So making that decision to be that cycle breaker, break that cycle around food and body beliefs for your family and do something different. So do the rules that you have around food actually make sense for you? Do you actually want to believe those? Do you actually want to believe that carbs are bad, or, ice cream is horrible and food is good or food is bad? Like, how is that working for you? And is that something that you want to continue to believe? Where did those rules even come from? Because chances are they were learned somewhere and they're not authentically yours. If they feel good to you, keep them. If they don't feel good to you, get rid of them. You can either take them or leave them. It is your choice. So start to notice where some of those food rules are popping up and see if there's any that you want to challenge, get rid of, change, rethink, keep, whatever. And the last thing I would encourage you to do is to lean into the unknown. Again, doing something different from dieting or having these food rules around the way you eat. Lean into, what it would look like if you didn't have those things anymore. Is there fear there? Is it scary? What are you afraid of? What would happen if you stopped dieting? If dieting or food rules hasn't served you in the past, what's the harm in trying something new? Would it be worth it? How would your life change? Would it bring more joy to your life since you're getting rid of all this stress around food and how you're eating? What would happen if your body changed? Would that even be bad? Perhaps it would bring more joy to your life if you weren't so controlled over how you looked and what you looked like. I don't know. So lean into that curiosity piece of what would happen if I changed the way I interacted with food? What would happen if I changed my beliefs around food and body? Is it worth it? Is it worth trying something new? In my opinion, it is 100% worth it. Having gone from like the whole evolution of, believing food and body and nourishment need to look one way. I mean, I'm a dietitian, so I went into that field for a reason, right? Because I had this narrative around food. So I made like the full circle where now I am still obviously a dietitian, but approach food from a much different perspective. So doing that unlearning work for yourself and seeing how it kind of shows up in your life. it can be unlearned, it can be changed, it can change the way you think about food, body, and that will just kind of spill out into the rest of your life. Becoming an intuitive eating counselor and a dietitian that believes in non-diet, anti-diet work, I have seen this change lives of hundreds of my patients. Whereas if I stayed working as a typical dietitian, handing out meal plans and putting people on diets, I don't think I would have done any, I would have done more harm than good. And I saw that unfolding before my eyes as well. So incredibly grateful to have this kind of awareness, and hopefully I can pass that on to you guys too. So you can change the way you feel about food and body and inspire or change the generations or your kids or your friends or family just by watching you do the work. So that was a lot of information. I know I talked really fast, but if you have questions, I'm happy, you can unmute, I think, and answer any questions. I do have an academy that I run. It's starting in November 7th. It's 4 months. We walk through all the different principles of intuitive eating. And I also am there to give you support for the times that you feel anxious around making these changes and letting go of food and diet rules. So if that's something you're interested in, always feel free to reach out to me. We can talk about that. But I hope there was a nugget of information that would be helpful for you today. Any questions?
Yeah. Jessica, that was so, it was really, everything that you said made so much sense. It was really, I loved everything that you said. One of my questions is, is there, because we're so used to immediate gratification, I'm assuming that it's different for everyone, but is there some kind of time framework where it begins to work for people when they make the switch from being, I'm definitely hyper focused on what I'm eating. Like you said, I don't know if you use the word punishing, but I punish myself with like the thoughts that I have about what I've eaten or how much I weigh or whatever. And I balance that out with like looking in the mirror at this size, which is the biggest I've ever been, and being like, you still look good. Like I go back and forth. But is there some kind of a time frame as to how long you think it takes to really sink in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I think even coming from like diet land, right? We have like 30-day challenge or 3 months. And so this idea that it will, that there could be this time frame. What I do see is that it really, can ebb and flow, where people usually in the beginning are all in, right? And it makes sense and things are clicking and they're doing the thing. And then all of a sudden around like that, I would say like that 3-month mark, people are like, brakes go on, they get a little scared, they get nervous, we slow down a little bit, and then we move through whatever obstacle is popping up. And around maybe the 6-month mark, that's when they start to feel like, okay, I'm getting some traction and making sense. The interesting thing with intuitive eating, though, is it's almost like you're hyper focused on the rules that you have and kind of challenging the rules. And then before you know it, probably around like that 6-month mark, it goes away, right? It just goes away. And all of a sudden you're not looking at food labels, or you're not thinking about the scale, and you're not thinking about how much you ate. It's just like this gentle transition from hyper focused on food to not. But it is, I would say, like 6 months maybe is where people start to feel like they are getting it, and able to kind of absorb it and feel a little bit more comfortable with practicing it. So it is a practice. It really is a practice. But good question.
Thank you. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? That was a good one. You don't have to have.
Well, I mean, my other question is, when you're living with other people and you're making these changes, I want to say, is it